Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining my newest town hall today. This is an important one, and I can't thank my guest enough for joining me on this. His name is Christian Picciolini. He is a former white supremacist who, for the last 25 years, has dedicated himself to combating racism and hate in America, actually around the world, and pulling people out of the movement. He is the founder of the Free Radicals Project and has just written a new book called Breaking Hate. He also has a series of the same name on MSNBC, and if you haven't seen that, I highly encourage you to check it out. Thank you, Christian, for being here. I so appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Patty, for having me. It's a pleasure, and it's really nice to actually see other people. So thank you for joining. I think hopefully, like everybody else, been kind of staying at home and trying to quarantine to get through this. But it's always nice to see everybody and their living rooms and things like that. So thanks for having me.
I know. My husband said, you really need to get a studio because sitting in the kitchen, that's not very professional. I'm like, what do you want? It is what it is.
Listen, when I start seeing CNN and folks in their kitchens, and it's professional, I think you're doing just fine.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the things when I announced that you were going to be my guest is I got some pushback, obviously. Why would you be interviewing a former skinhead? Why don't you talk to people who are the subject of racism or who get the brunt of that during their everyday life? And my feeling is that it's really important to understand where people are coming from if we have any hope of connecting with them. And for me, you are the perfect person to talk to about this subject simply because you've been on both sides of the issue. And you also are proof that you can come out the other side, of it and make a difference in a positive way in people's lives. And I really want to thank you for that because I can't imagine that the path that you're on at the moment is being well received by the people that used to be or that still are in these groups that you used to know. So how do you deal with that?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I do want to acknowledge, my privilege in being able to be here and to tell my story. I recognize that there are a lot of people who have brown skin who don't get the same second chances that I got. So I do acknowledge that. But I hope that by telling my story, I can help, people understand. I think something that is on everybody's mind, especially today. It's not anything new. What I was involved in has been something that has kind of taken hold of our country from the very beginning. And the victims of systemic and institutional racism who suffer every day absolutely need their stories heard as well. I just hope that I can shed light on something that I think very few people have really shed light on, and that is how these people work, why they work, how they're targeting people, especially today in this environment, to grow their movement. So I am, trying very hard, at least for the last 20 years, to dismantle what I helped build by bringing some truth to it and some insight that maybe has historically been really, really difficult to kind of shed light on. For those that don't know, maybe just to talk a little bit about my story in a nutshell, I was a member of the neo-Nazi skinhead movement from 1987 to 1996 for 8 years, roughly. From the time I was 14 years old until I was 23 years old. I was recruited when I was barely a teenager. But I wasn't raised as a racist in my home. In fact, my parents are Italian immigrants who came to the US in the mid-60s. And when they arrived, they were often the victims of prejudice. So it really was not a foundation of my home. It was kind of the opposite of that. My parents had friends from all over the world, from different religions and races, and I was always exposed to that. But what I struggled with growing up, which led me to the movement, was the fact that my parents, as immigrants, had to work 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, and I never saw them. And I knew that they loved me, that there wasn't any abuse, there wasn't, I was always surrounded by love, but I felt abandoned growing up for those first 14 years. So I went searching for a sense of community, a family outside of my home. And I found it in an alley in 1987 while I was smoking a joint. And a guy came up to me and he pulled the joint from my mouth and he looked me in the eyes and he said, "That's what the communists and the Jews want you to do to keep you docile." It turned out that guy was America's first neo-Nazi skinhead leader who was searching for vulnerable young people to recruit into his gang. And I was standing there and not understanding what a communist was, if I'd met a Jewish person, or even what the word docile meant. It was the first person in my life that I felt kind of offered me some attention. And that reward to me was greater than the confusion that I had around the ideology, because I didn't understand it, but I was willing to swallow it to belong. And suddenly it filled three really important things for me. And there are three things that every single one of us on this video have searched for in our lives. And that's a sense of identity, community, and purpose. I was an idealistic kid. I wanted to change the world. And I had a group of ballerinas come up to me in that alley that day. I would have been the greatest ballet dancer on earth, probably. But it's not what happened, unfortunately. And the first person to kind of offer me that sense of identity of who I am, because I was confused. I didn't know if I was Italian. I didn't know if I was American. I didn't know if I was Italian American. I was kind of an outsider. He said, "You are a white European man and you have to protect something. That is your purpose. Because this family that you're now a part of, somebody wants to take that away from you." Now, of course, that wasn't happening, but that's what I was sold. And as a 14-year-old kid, to be offered, this sense of being somebody and being seen and being given this great, entrusted with this great challenge of protecting the white race to somebody who had been invisible just a couple of weeks before that, was intoxicating. And I dove headfirst into it and I swallowed everything whole because I knew that was the price of admission. And I also then believed it. Because I was in a bubble. It was everything that I was being taught. It was my education, and music became a very big part of the education. It became propaganda. Then I started making racist music, so it kind of built this whole world for me, where I suddenly was powerful. I was seen. I was respected. I'm putting up air quotes on those things because I was none of those. I was not powerful. I was not respected. I was not seen. I felt alienated before I joined that movement as an outsider. And when I joined, even though I felt more empowered, I was more alienated than I'd ever been in my whole life. So it was kind of a lot like drugs in that sense, where it made me feel good while I was doing it, but it was killing me every day that I got further down that rabbit hole. And it was killing, the people around me, not to mention the victims of my violence and the victims of my verbal abuse and things like that. So, it was a very toxic environment that was very difficult to get out of, even though I have to be honest and say that every day of those 8 years that I was involved, even though I was a leader and I was outspoken and I was making music and I was seen as a respected person, I had doubts every day about what I believed in, because it's an illogical ideology based on violence and based on exclusion. So, but it also wasn't a place where you can, voice those types of, that type of confusion. You couldn't be vulnerable with the other people in the movement. You couldn't tell them you had doubts. That was a death sentence, and going in literally and figuratively, potentially. Figuratively, nobody in the outside world wanted me back. So I embraced it. And it wasn't until, those 8 years and I went through kind of a snowball effect of meeting the people that I thought I hated, kind of, secretly and, one-on-one and, an accident, whatever it was, that snowballed into the fact that I could not deny that I actually was humanizing them, that I actually did build a respect for the people that I thought I hated, people of color, people who were Jewish or were gay or were anti-racist. I started to actually like them in secret because I'd, meet them at the grocery store. They'd come into my record store to buy a CD, and instead of attacking me, they wanted to challenge me with compassion. And I'm glad that they did, because it offered me the chance to replace my demonization with humanization.
Do you have any feeling on why one person, well, a lot of kids, I think, are in the situation that you were? You know, you've got working parents, you don't fit in at school. Why do you think some people take the path that you took, kind of towards extremism and racism and blaming others for your situation, and other people in that situation kind of go the other way? You know, they want to help people, they want to embrace people, they love people. What's the difference between those two people? Do you have any feeling on that at all?
It's easy to hate, and it's hard to love, because if you love something, you risk losing something very important.
Mhm.
If you're constantly in a mode of hating something, it's easy to blame and cut off ties with everything that is causing you pain.
Yeah.
So for some people, whether they, again, it's not ideology that's leading people to these movements. I really do believe that. Nobody's born, a Nazi or,
Right.
a racist. They may be born into an environment where that's fostered, but they still have to learn it, right? So people are led to these ideologies by what I call potholes. And I'm talking about, metaphorical potholes in their life's journey, not the millions that we have here in Chicago in our streets, but the ones that we encounter every day. Things like trauma, grief, loss, losing a job, divorce, mental illness, all of these things that kind of detour us if we're not careful, if we don't have the resources to repair them or navigate around them, or analyze them and come up with a plan. Sometimes they detour us, and if they detour us to the fringes, there are all sorts of toxic narratives on the fringes that can get a hold of us,
Mhm.
right? That can be political or ideological extremism. It could be, religious extremism. It could be even drug abuse. It can be school shooting. It could be suicide, which I think is a personal extremism. Um, but on those fringes, those narratives are flourishing, and they're looking for vulnerable people to falsely empower with those narratives.
Right.
Um, these are not feel good movements. They on the outside they wrap themselves as protecting something of great importance, but if you look at all the tenets of how to protect that, it is by eliminating everything else, so that it becomes so isolated that it's the only thing left. um, that may work with like cancer and other things, but it doesn't work in society when we need each other to function. We're all
Right.
cells of kind of like a larger body, and we need to be able to communicate and work together, and that and electricity has to feed off of each other for those cells to operate. So it's the opposite. But we're living in a time right now where millions of young people who are searching for identity, meaning, and purpose, millions of people, not just young people, are online, not in an alley. The internet is that digital alley. It's a 24-hour all you can eat buffet of hate, of whatever you want it to be, essentially, depending on what bubble you live in. And there are millions and millions of young isolated people living online who are finding these narratives on the fringes, who are detoured by their potholes.
Yeah.
But I would also argue, as a society, not just people, but as a society can have potholes that detours us on a search for identity, community, and purpose. And I think that that's something that our country is struggling with. I
Yeah.
think we have historical potholes we've never fixed. We've never talked and solved, our institutional and systemic racism. Um, you know, it's not a just country for everybody equally.
Mhm.
And we still don't know who the hell we are, where we belong, and what we're supposed to do with our lives. So, I think that we're in a really dangerous place right now.
And I think too that there may be a stigma or a misconception about the type of people who are
Mm.
being brought in and recruited, and who are capable of adopting this kind of way of life. But I think what you find, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's a lot of different backgrounds. People of all backgrounds are in these groups. And I think that that just kind of proves how really scary and dangerous it is right now, that
Mm.
really anybody could
Yeah, it
adopt
doesn't
ideas.
there really is no, perfect subject. I work with people of privilege, and privilege itself can be a pothole if it keeps us so separated from, the rest of humanity.
Right.
Um, I work with men, I work with women, I work with young people and old people to help them disengage. And the only commonality is that search for identity, community, and purpose, and the fact that there were potholes that detoured them. Not one person, will tell you, very rarely, I was raised to be a Nazi, right? Like maybe now generationally, if there are, people from my generation who went on to have kids who stayed in, that may very well be, but those kids still have to learn it. And in some cases, I've actually seen that they're the children of people in the movement today, from my generation of the movement, their children are the opposites. Because if you think about it, how many young people rebel against their parents by amplifying what it is their parents are about? They typically, will go in a different direction to push those buttons. But yeah, it's we just need to be very careful, because I think we're living in a time of uncertainty right now. The only thing that's certain is that we are uncertain. We have a contested election or a heated election coming up. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We're facing unprecedented, job loss and unemployment. Other countries are going through, every country is going through the same thing. This isn't just isolated to us. So this right now is the perfect storm for extremism to grow, because oftentimes the voices that are the loudest, even though they're the fewest, are some of the most extreme. And they're the ones that tend to kind of cut through all the noise, and people are searching for answers, and they're searching in kind of untrusted places, and sometimes our trusted places are giving us untrustworthy information. So we are all kind of living in this perfect storm where extremism, if we're not very careful, can flourish very, very quickly.
Yeah, and it's you touched on it. It's not just a white thing, right? We've got racism in all races. We've got hate in all religions. A lot of the wars that have been fought in honor of religion. So it's really everywhere. And how do you not hear it? How do you tune it out? Like how do we teach our kids, or how do we protect our kids from getting sucked into that? And they can't avoid it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear too. I mean, like in terms of racism, typically, when we talk about racism, it's about people who hold power. I would say hate is, can be prevalent in any case, and whatever. But if we're talking about racism specifically as it pertains to the U.S., it's difficult to make a case for anybody but white people to be labeled as racist, because it's white power that is holding the power. But how do we keep people from going down that rabbit hole? Because, and let me preface this by saying, I get emails from Jewish mothers who are horrified their sons are coming home with swastika tattoos, who are denying the Holocaust. I deal with people who were born in Mexico City who are white nationalists. It transcends that. So, to say the stereotype is just white people who are part of these movements, yes, that is largely what's happening, but it is, again, because it's not about ideology and it's a search for identity, community, and purpose. People are finding empowerment, even if they're not white sometimes in these groups, and they may not even know what they're doing. And I've seen that. It's, as crazy as that sounds, I see quite a bit of that. But yeah, I forgot your question, Pat. Ask your question again.
Well, I will, but I just want to touch on what you just said, because it was something in your story that I found interesting. It's like, you come from an immigrant background, but what you preached was very anti-immigrant, and then you're talking about, people from the Jewish faith who are now wearing swastikas. How do they marry those two things in their mind? Because usually it's like, well, you really can't hate what you know, but you knew your family and your parents, and you knew they weren't what you were saying those people were. How can they put those two together and still move forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to speak for other people, but I can tell you from my experience, I was punishing my parents. I was angry at my parents, so I punished who they were. I think for a lot of people, it was very the reason that they gravitate towards these movements and act the way they do is more personal, right? It's because of their immediate surroundings or lack thereof. So in some cases, it's a direct attack on their family environment. They may have, you know, felt you know, a grievance or slighted or whatever the case. You know, it could be a million different reasons because there are a million different people.
Yeah.
But it could be a self-hatred, like there could be an anger, and they've chosen to punish people around them by adopting something that's the complete opposite of what they would accept. You know, for some people, the reward of belonging is enough to forget you know, everything else about who they are and maybe how they're, you know, their people have suffered. You know, for some people, there are other issues. I think, you know, mental illness is something that, you know, because of the lack of connections and reality to people and friends and bullying and things like that, can sometimes isolate people to make them make decisions that are completely, you know,
Yeah.
against their well-being. Again, there are millions of reasons. It's not as black and white as it seems. But it's the same reasons why somebody might gravitate to, you know, find acceptance in a drug culture or in a gang or in a cult or in, you know, it really is about searching for the sense of, I need to know who I am. I need to know who my family is, where I belong, what my tribe is, and what I'm supposed to do with my life. What am I destined to do? And these extremist groups are very good at filling those, right? Like, you are white, or you are ISIS, or you are a warrior of some, you know, something. And your community is your family, it's your folk. And if you don't protect it, it will disappear. And that's your purpose, to secure its existence by all means necessary. And, you know, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that is the opposite of what it's intended for, because they pitch that it's supposed to protect something, but what it does is destroy everything around it.
Yeah.
Including itself.
If the agenda of people who belong is to belong and to feel important and to feel powerful, what's the agenda of the movement? Like, what's the end goal for them? Is it just to create havoc, or are they really truly have a plan for something?
It depends on which segment of, you know, the movement you're talking about. If we're talking about, you know, let's say the white supremacist movement, within that there are, you know, within that ecosystem there are different societies, so to speak. You've got neo-Nazis and skinheads and the Klan and white nationalists and, you know, Proud Boys and all these things, and each one has kind of, I think, a different agenda. But if you were to kind of look at the umbrella of white supremacy, it's in the name, right? It is to reign supreme over everybody else who isn't a part of that. It is to hold all the power. In some cases, then the more militant types, it's to eliminate, you know, everybody else. To some, they might pitch it, you know, in a lighter version and say, we just want to be separated. But I guarantee you, to any separatists out there, they would be just as happy if their enemies were eliminated as if they were separated. So don't let them fool you, right? You know, even though there's like an alt-light to, you know, a militant extremist ultra-Nazi, you know, whatever we want to call them, and there's like gradations of that. Even from the alt-light version, it is about maligning other people and exerting their power over them, right? So one could argue that even the alt-light is as bad as, you know, as somebody who's walking into a synagogue, because they're still about oppression, but it's more about institutional oppression and things like that, whereas the other ones are about more militant oppression. And all of them need to be held accountable the same way. Nobody gets a free pass. So, you know, I always want to preface this too, because I'm helping pull people out of these hate groups. It's not because I'm a PR agency trying to whitewash anything. I'm holding them accountable. Nobody gets a free pass when they work with me. I've been holding myself to task for 20 years, making amends, making sure I go into the communities that I've hurt, acknowledging, you know, what I've done and being really, really honest about it. And I hold the people that I work with to task too, not only because it helps other people, but because it helps them. They need to be honest, and they won't be able to move forward unless they've fixed those potholes of what led them there to begin with. So I encourage people to repair the damage they've done. That to me is the that is the mark of forgiveness, is if you
Yeah.
can go and repair the damage that you've caused. So I do encourage that. But I don't want to paint every person who goes into these movements as evil. Of course, there are people who do evil things. I did things that I absolutely regret and I wish I never did. And I acknowledge, the fact that that's hurt people. But I also want to say people do get lost in these movements, and there is hope for
Yeah.
pulling people out. I mean, I've seen it hundreds of times. I've been a part of it hundreds of times.
Right.
It's hard. It's the hardest thing to do. And I talk about it in my book, Breaking Hate. It's the hardest thing to do, but it's important, is to see the child, not the monster. Whether it doesn't matter if that person is 16 or 60. If we can do that, if we can understand that there's something that led them there that was broken, then we can address it, and we can figure out how to solve this whole cloth. But it's going to take changing our society. We have to solve the institutional and systemic racism. Otherwise, it's a factory churning out privileged racists.
Yeah.
And we have to.
And privilege, when I have posted that several times, about my white privilege. And I think some people hear that and they think, well, I'm not privileged. I can't find a job. I'm a single mom. My family lived in a trailer. We were poor. It's not that kind of privilege. The privilege that white privilege is talking about is the fact that I can go for a run and not get shot and murdered. I can get pulled over by the police and not end up dead. I can wear a hoodie. I can buy Skittles. I mean, it's an I can do all of these things because of the color of my skin and not worry about the consequences. It doesn't even enter my mind. That's the white privilege that we're talking about.
And it's the presumption of goodness over the prejudice of bad. Yeah. Right? It's about running the same race, but one person running it at the starting line, not ahead, and one group running it from behind the starting line. Nobody's saying anybody's getting necessarily a head start, but it's saying it is ingrained in our culture, in our society, to look at people differently and to favor or to have an opinion differently about one over the other. And that's a real thing. That is a real thing. But I would go even further to say that, what you're saying, it's dangerous to not be white. You can die from not being white just for that. Yep. No other reason but for the color of your skin. And that is something that must change.
And you were saying that we have to hold people accountable, but when you look at our society today, it used to be, especially in your movement, you could spot a skinhead. You could say, yep, he's a racist or she's a racist. You could see them coming a mile away. But nowadays, they're in the police force, they're judges, they're prosecutors, they're employers, they're bankers, they're hiding in plain sight, and they look like all of us, but they have these powers or have powerful positions. And so how do we hold them accountable? I mean, look how long it took for Ahmaud's case to even come to the light of day, because people were burying it. How do we stand up as a society when we're fighting against that at the top levels, our politicians even?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I think that always existed. Okay. I think we always had people who were politicians and in police forces. And, I think this whole idea of, the ideology of white nationalism has gelled people together, but I think that it always existed. Yeah. What happened, though, in the 80s and 90s, and why we see a less visible kind of, we saw skinheads in the 80s and 90s, we knew exactly what they were. Yeah. Right? It was our job to tell you who we were. We wore it literally on our sleeves, tattooed on us, on our jackets. We shaved our heads. We wore boots because as part of what we were trying to become this visible part of the fringe movement, it was to terrify people. We wanted to scare people when they saw us because we were small. We needed to do that. As we grew, though, it became easier for law enforcement to infiltrate and to take down these groups. And leaders of these groups like the Klan and skinheads started to say, hey, we can't have this. We're making it too easy to get, taken down. So we're encouraging people not to join our groups. We want to bring them in. It'll be about the ideology, but you're not going to be part of a group. You're not going to have a membership. You're not going to shave your head. You're not going to wave that swastika flag. Instead, you're going to go into your community and you're going to blend in. You're going to join the police forces and you're going to, talk about these things. So there was an effort to do that. David Duke was really one of the first people to do that when he took off the Klan robe and ran for the House of Representatives, right? And he won in Louisiana. And that kind of started this process of the normalization of the militant white nationalist ideology in the mainstream. Back in my day in the 80s and 90s, though, we didn't have mass media that was like really mimicking and mirroring our propaganda. We had pamphlets and you got invited to meetings and there were these newspapers that you could subscribe to and this and that, but you couldn't turn on the television and watch a 24-hour news network dedicated, to far right news and conspiracies. You have that today. You have the internet today, which, frankly, you could log on right now, type in a keyword, and it'll take you to an endless stream of sites and videos where, you could fall down a rabbit hole easily. So again, while that always existed, the last 20, 30 years, there's really been a push from the movement to blend in. So they did encourage people to run for office, to do things like that. And I think we're seeing the effects of that now. I also wonder about the thousands of skinheads that I knew that, suddenly disappeared and where they may have ended up. And while I hope some of them got out, and I know some of them did, I wonder about where the other ones ended up.
Yeah. And getting out, and I want to talk about hate as well, because, hate is really blooming right now, politically, especially is like the most, the one that's, on TV a lot and, on social media a lot. I mean, I have family who doesn't talk to me anymore because I'm a Democrat running for office, which is really shocking. And when I posted this event, I had some people saying, I'm promoting racism, or it's people like me who make everything about race. And, or you have people posting or saying racist things, and the second they get called out, it's like, that's not what I meant. That, you're taking it that way. How do we get through to these people? Because to me, I have tried to engage them in the past and it goes south in a hurry. How do we get them to the point where they can listen? How can we tap them way deep inside where they live and get them to realize, that what they're saying it's just wrong. It's unfounded.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for somebody who's very uncomfortable in a situation to say, I don't want to talk about that. You're the one saying, that stuff. So let's not talk about. So, I can see why they do that, because it's very hard for them to talk about something emotional, right? This is a tough thing to talk about, because I really am a proponent of not engaging in debate when it comes to this, because I really do believe you cannot win an illogical argument using logic. You just can't. It has to be emotional. I think that there's a place for debate, and certainly, people learn from debate, but I think that as a tactic, it's too aggressive as a first tactic.
Okay.
People put up a guard. So what I prefer to do is finding ways to meet on things that are fundamentally mutual. And that doesn't mean meeting in the middle on ideological stuff. I'm talking about, like, we all love our children for the most part. We all, want to live in a safe home. We all, want to work. We all want to be educated and healthy and safe. And finding ways to talk about that without the politics involved with that gets us to a place where we can meet in the middle. And eventually, when you have those conversations, you'll go off track, right? Because it will, oh, well, I don't have a job because of this. But you can always find your way back to the middle, to that starting point. If you start off at the ends, like, I'm right and you're wrong, and this is why, you never really kind of meet in the middle. So as a tactic, just finding, things that you actually do agree on, in terms of like, personal life or hobbies or whatever, and then seeing, where it goes off track and then working to get it back on track slowly but surely tends to work. We also, I think, if we're talking about young people, I think we need to listen more. And it's not listening to their ideology, it's listening to, kind of what's under all that white noise of their words, sometimes even listening to the things that they're not saying, and being vulnerable as adults with young people, because if we can't learn to be vulnerable with them and they don't know that, and they don't know that we can be vulnerable, they'll never learn to be vulnerable with us. They will never share with us what's wrong with them. They tend to look at us as superheroes or people that they need to please, right? And they will never share what's broken with them if we never share what's broken about us. And it's this cautious vulnerability about saying, like, I'm not perfect either. I struggle because I think my ears are too big, or because, I don't think and it's okay to have those conversations with young people about what we're not sure about. And that's so that they can learn to have those conversations with us. And that's really, I think, where it needs to start.
Well, you mentioned, I mean, obviously you were to the extreme, but yet people who came into your record store were able to pick at that slowly and challenge you and really start to change your mind over time, like I would imagine sort of slow drip. What approach did they take with you to accomplish that? When you are most likely thinking something in your head about who's talking to you, but yet somehow they were able to connect with you on an emotional place that you weren't even sure you had, I guess.
They never came in and talked to me about what I believed. They talked to me about music and, about recommendations for other bands that were similar to this. I think that they were very smart about how they did it and very intentional. And at first I was really kind of standoffish. I wasn't interested in having conversations with the people I didn't like, or I thought I didn't like, until, they kept coming back, and it was just like, it was cognitive dissonance building up, really, what it was. Eventually I'd say, well, I kind of like that person. And then I'd meet somebody else. I'd be like, wait, this is like, I'm not supposed to like them. Why do I keep thinking they're okay? And then eventually it changed how I acted towards them. Instead of putting my guard up, and just trying to be a good businessman, I was actually, laughing with them. And then I'd find myself like, talking about something completely different. That my guard was down, and it just felt natural. So it was maybe on their part a very strategic, non-aggressive attack on me.
Yeah.
To try and just connect with me on a different level. I don't even know that they were trying to do that on purpose, but it worked. What wouldn't have worked is had they thrown bricks through my windows or spray painted my store. Not saying that they would have, because they weren't doing that.
Right.
But had they done that, I would have probably gotten angry. My guard would have gone up. I would have been more defensive. I would have seen them as enemies without skipping over all the other parts that would have connected us.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been just a natural self-defense. And I probably, and I'm grateful that they didn't do that, because I don't know that I would have had the safe place to disengage had that happened.
And I mean, sometimes it can be scary, to work on people. I'm sure people have experienced being in a room and people are making racist jokes, and you're the only one not laughing, and at that moment, is there some way that we can engage people, me as a white person, right? So in your case, these were people coming to you who were the people you thought you didn't like. But me as a white person, how can I go to another white person and say, no, you've got it. I know what you said, you can't butt heads on things that you disagree, but how do you get there if you don't have months and months? Is there any short-term options that we can use?
Yeah, I mean, I think every time we meet somebody, have a moment with them, open a door for them, connect eyes, is one of those snowball moments. So, and it seems futile at first when you do this. These things take a long time. People don't break bad habits overnight. It has to be repeated exposure. So I would just say, don't expect like that one interaction to change anybody,
Yeah.
right? And don't expect that it's just going to be you that's going to change it. It's about really, it takes a village, that saying is it really does take a village to kind of overpower that hate with
Yeah.
love. One person isn't enough. Two people, is a good start, but it's like we have to find ways to both hold people accountable and be compassionate to them in hopes that that's what will kind of allow them to find that off ramp from hate. Because I guarantee you, and again, I've worked with hundreds of people, there's not one person in those movements that doesn't wish they weren't there secretly,
Interesting.
because they're toxic. They're full. You're constantly on edge. Hate is tiring.
Yeah.
You're constantly having to prove to yourself that this is the right thing to believe while being faced with a whole world of evidence that it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
It's tiring. So it does take time, effort, a lot of little things, sometimes big moments. Like for me, when my children were born, I was married at 19 years old to a girl who was not part of the movement. Somehow she believed in me enough, because when I was with her, I was different. I was this, compassionate, loving husband, father. I was kind. And when I walked out the door, I was like, this warlord. She saw something in me. And when my children were born, it was the first thing that challenged my sense of identity, community, and purpose. Because I had to ask myself, was I a father or was I a hate monger? They couldn't live together. You couldn't love and hate at the same time. You
Right.
couldn't. And I had to ask myself, to choose a community. Was it the one that I'd surrounded myself with, or was it the one I'd given life to? And the purpose changed everything. So it does. Sometimes it can be those things that do change somebody's perspective. And it's the first time I had something to love in my life. Like it was.
Yeah.
I thought I'd loved like my brothers and sisters and all, like these people I was fighting side by side with, but we were all like terrified and insecure and fighting for something we didn't quite believe in 100%, even though we said we did.
Yeah.
There's always a doubt because it's an illogical ideology. There's always room for doubt.
Yeah. Do you think it would help if we taught diversity and empathy in our schools, reach the kids at a really young age and just follow that through all the way through K through 12, or, at least, would that help kind of derail some people? Would that help open some eyes? Or do you think their individual potholes would still lead them in a direction that they shouldn't go?
I think we can teach all we want, but unless we fix personal potholes and even larger potholes, people will always get detoured because they'll always be looking to fill that void with something else. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to teach history the right way and teach it consistently. I mean, I speak to students all around the country, all around the world, and it's amazing to me when I go to schools in, the northern US and we learn, you learn that they learn about like, the Civil War and that it was about slavery and the fight to abolish slavery. But you go to the South, it was about Northern aggression and all. Like, it's like we're not even necessarily consistently teaching things,
Right.
our history the right way. And we gloss over things that are very, very vital and explain why things are today. Most
Yeah.
people don't understand, but Adolf Hitler got his views on race and eugenics through through American racism. Jim Crow and things like that inspired Hitler, not the other way around. This is part of who we are. So we do have to tackle this
Yeah.
head on. But I would go so far as to say that, maybe high school seniors shouldn't spend it in the classroom, that maybe we should bring back, that everybody who turns 17 has to register for civil service to be able, not to go to the military, but to work in government, to work as, pages and to work in nonprofits and to travel the world and to work with other people their age that are not from their communities, people who are different than them, and spend their whole senior year as an experiential learning and pay them to do that.
Yeah.
Because they're working. Give them money to do that, so it starts their career and they have something to put on their resume, and they're working in, like civil society and in social services and in government or whatever. Pay them to do that and give half of it in college savings bonds that they can use for college. So their college is paid for, and they're making an income, and they're learning how to work, and they're working in the real world. I'd rather learn about the world from the world than out of a textbook. And I think that that might be a really good way to do that.
Absolutely. So we have some questions, and I want to make sure we've got 10 minutes left. Atika, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question that you have.
Thank you so much, Patty, for arranging this. And thank you so much, Christian. I have watched your TED Talk numerous times, and as a Muslim immigrant woman of color who's raising 2 kids in this society, my fears are reflected in a lot of the things that you say. My question is about the institutional racism that exists in our police forces, for example. You know, what I have seen is that the only color that anyone in the police force, regardless of their racial or ethnic background, the only color that they see is the thin blue line. I also find it very distressing that a lot of times when a social justice advocate like myself or someone who works in this field trying to dismantle racism, when we talk about institutional racism, there are police officers of color that we face backlash from because of this whole brotherhood mentality, this mindset, this fraternal mindset. They protect each other and they protect the force instead of speaking out. So clearly having a diverse police force is not exactly an answer. So how can we infiltrate these institutions and slowly dismantle the racism that exists and this mindset that you know, regardless of what the police force does, we must never question their loyalty to us or the nation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's, and thank you for your question, Atika. I think that that's a really great example of identity, community, and purpose, right? You shed all your other identities, you know, if we're talking about the police officers that you're talking about, to adopt that new one, and that one now matters above all else. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to get to a culture change within law enforcement for them to understand that they are public servants protecting the public, and not kind of overlords, you know, protecting the rule of law from the public. I really do believe that police officers should be hired from the communities that they live in. They should serve the communities that they live in. They should also, and if they don't, as part of their training, maybe it should be living with a family from that community. And if it's a white officer, maybe it's living with a family of color, you know, for a month or two to understand what it is that, you know, might be a struggle or might be, you know, independent to that community, or might be, you know, valuable to that community. You have to uphold the law in that community. You have to understand the people that live there, the challenges that they face, the nuances that might be, you know, who might have mental illness in that community versus, you know, who might be seen as a criminal if you don't understand that it might be mental illness that's driving some of what seems like, you know, that behavior. I don't know what the answer to this is. I wish I had an answer, because it is a massive problem. It's you know, I live in Chicago. We have our fair share of issues in Chicago when it comes to this. And I think it is because, you know, we have the kind of this tribalistic culture where you can leave a tribe that you felt part of and join another one, and all of a sudden you shed that and adopt everything of that new tribe and forget. And I think what we have to understand is at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and no color, no badge, no political office, no job, no bank account changes the fact that we are all human beings at our core. And, you know, we all essentially have the same fundamental needs. So I think we need to realize that. I think we also need to realize that we're all broken, every single one of us. I know that's not a cool thing to say, like, oh, we're strong. No, we are all, every single one of us is dealing with something that nobody else here on this call knows about. In some cases that your family doesn't know about, or that your best friend doesn't know about. And if we can understand that this kind of universality of brokenness exists, and that we need each other, that's how we fix this. We need each other. We're all like playing on that plane. And yes, we're operating, some kind of starting ahead of others and some having more favor than others. We need to find a way to eliminate that and understand that at our core, we are human beings who really need the same nourishment.
Yeah. And I think
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we were talking about, earlier how people are just looking for someone to blame. Like right now, I think I look at all the protests in the courthouses, and you have, the Confederate flags and the guns, and it seems to me like their hate is really taking advantage of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. You had mentioned it earlier, unemployment is high. People don't want to be told what to do because we're free Americans, and all this, it kind of snowballs. What strategy can we use? Because we look at how dangerous it is to be a counter protester. In Charlotte, Heather lost her life doing that, and it just seems like things are starting to spiral out of control, getting more and more violent, more and more aggressive. It used to be you could sit down and have a conversation about something, and now they're in your face and spitting as they talk. And how do we get out of this? It is definitely understanding, like you said, that we're all in this together. But when somebody is at that stage, how do you break
I think
down?
we're suffering leadership. I think we're suffering from a lack of leadership. I mean, we may not have always trusted our politicians, but we've always saw them as some sort of voice of reason, right? That, at least wasn't dividing us. We've always had political differences, but we've never had the polarization that we're dealing with today, at least, in modern times. I think it really, it has to be kind of a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up approach at the same time. Like, we need voices at the top who we can trust are putting in places the things that, will minimize suffering going forward, right? Especially in this pandemic. And from the bottom up, we need to not rely on those voices so much, and make sure that we are doing the things that we have the control over, to make sure we're not so dependent on that, right? And that means being, voices in our community to people who are marginalized, being, bridges, and offering things that maybe we're just not getting fulfilled in other places. I think it's going to take time. Again, uncertainty right now is flourishing, and I think until we can find a little bit more certainty, people are going to be searching, and they're going to be searching very loudly, and I think in some cases very violently, either to protect something that they think is being taken away from them, or because they're just angry and they want to punish other people. I think what's happening now, what you're seeing, is extremists know this is a really good time to recruit people. They know this is a really good time when people are trying to figure out what to do, or what to believe in, or what to invest in, mentally speaking, and they know that. So they are they thrive when conditions are confusing. So they are both taking advantage of that, but further creating those conditions that further confuse us. So, you have propaganda, you have conspiracy theories, you have fake news, all these things that are creating these chaotic conditions, because they know then that they can swoop around with these kind of out of the box answers, and to a lot of people, they will make sense. So they're very good at creating the conditions that they need to thrive.
Yeah, and I have a friend who's on the other side of the aisle, and we have really good conversations. One of the things that him and I are working jointly on is trying to get people to understand that just because someone is this, insert label, doesn't mean they're this way or that they believe in the things that you think they believe in. And I said to him at one point, you know, I think it's so hard to get through because in order for someone to say, oh my gosh, you're a Democrat and like you're a good person, that doesn't compute. They all of a sudden have to search their soul and admit to themselves that they've been duped and that their thoughts and their feelings really aren't their own. They belong to somebody else. And the sole purpose of that is to keep somebody in power or, you know, to serve somebody else's agenda. And I think yeah. And I think that's really hard for somebody. It's pride to come to that realization that, oh my gosh, you know, now I have to go on social media and say, I was wrong. You know, people are
nobody, like, as somebody who's admitted that they were wrong,
yeah,
it's not easy.
yeah.
Trust me, it is, you know, to say you've lived your life a certain way, that you've publicly said certain things, that you've, you know, stood behind them, and that, you know, maybe you're doing the wrong thing. That's a really tough thing to do, which is why people don't like to change when they've been shamed. You know, which is getting people to come to these decisions that they're wrong is what I do.
Yeah.
I am not the one, as much as I know that I'm sitting across from a Nazi who's denying the Holocaust, and I know that they're wrong and that they're bad and that they're saying these things, I still never tell them that.
Yeah.
I let them come to their own decision, that they say, I've been wrong.
Yeah.
I've been doing bad things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the trick, is they have to feel it.
Yeah. And you do that masterfully. If you know, I've watched Breaking Hate, and, you know, just introducing them to the people that they thought they hated, you know, I'm sorry, his name has slipped my mind, but you took him to introduce to Heather's mom in the church, you know, and he was really shocked at her level of compassion, and you could really see the wheels turning in his head, trying to make sense of what he thought he knew. So you were really good at that, and that's a skill that I think a lot of us here really want to learn and understand, but in an hour, you know, we obviously can't get that. So where can people go to kind of follow what you're doing, to help what you're doing, to learn the methods that you're using? How can we, as regular everyday citizens, join you to stop this nonsense, this chaos, really?
Well, thank you. And thanks for mentioning the show. It's a really hard TV show to watch because it's not on demand, but what I just did, and you can't, and I did not do this, but there are 3 links there to watch the 3 episodes of the show. I just ask that nobody share them, please. Okay. But you can watch the 3, and you can actually see the work of me helping people disengage from hate, and what I do to do that. So a lot of what we talked about today. Yeah, I mean, it is a hard thing to sit there. And first of all, let me say this. It is important to acknowledge that it is never the responsibility of the person of color, the potential victim, to put themselves in that position, to be nice to the bad guy. I don't ever want to make people think that that is what they're supposed to do. I think that's what we should all do as human beings, is we should find ways to connect with people and be compassionate, and see the child, not the monster. But I would never put that onus on you know, potential you know, victims of somebody like that. But we have to find a way to really turn the corner on this and have these conversations that are very uncomfortable. And I think it needs to start. I think we need to go through a period where we're teaching our young people the right way, putting them in situations that they naturally and organically develop these, you know, very natural feelings of compassion and empathy and that, and keep them out of the situations where they have to feel like they're putting on a suit of armor to protect themselves, you know, with hate. Ask me the second part of your question because I forgot that part.
Well, I've been getting a lot of questions in the chat, you know, how can we help you in your mission? How can we join together? How can we learn, you know, see what you're doing and maybe adopt some of the things that we can?
Sure. Well, I run an organization, a nonprofit organization called the Free Radicals Project. We're always looking for volunteers. You know, certainly fundraising is important to us because that's how we help pay for some of these programs, like, you know, psychiatrists and therapists and job trainers and tattoo removal and things like that. But also, if you are in any of those professions, please do volunteer, because we are always looking for therapists and you know, psychologists and job trainers, life coaches, all of that to work with people, and we work with people all around the world. But ultimately, I think it comes down to is really finding somebody that we feel doesn't deserve our compassion, and finding a way to give it to them, and just kind of watching what happens, because I guarantee you that those are the people, even though they may not deserve it, probably we can benefit the most from them receiving it. And I think we'll see a massive change in people if we can do that.
And I just got a question too. You had mentioned that it's not the responsibility of people of color to put themselves in that position, but what if they want to help? What if they want to do their part and speak their truth? How can they help and still stay safe in the process?
Well, nobody, you know, I mean, I know it should go unsaid that we should never feel like harm can come to us from speaking the truth, but unfortunately that is the truth. You know, some people don't have that luxury. I would say do what you think feels right to you. For me, I can tell you that the experience that had the most impact on me was a person of color. It was the old security guard at my old high school. The head of security, his name was John Holmes, who I tormented through high school. With, you know, protests and white student union, you know, pickets and fights and all that. And this was a guy that years later, after I left the movement, but I still hadn't talked about it, I had a chance run in with him, and he encouraged me, and he forgave me. He encouraged me to tell my story. And he said, you have to not only seek forgiveness, but you have to find a way to forgive yourself too. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know that I would be doing what I'm doing today. And I'm so grateful for that. So it was a Black man who had the most impact on me and showed me compassion at a time when I didn't deserve it. And he was the person I least deserved it from, and it had tremendous impact on me.
Yeah, and of course it was the people of color into your record store that really showed you that they weren't what you perceived them to be also. Yeah. Well,
thank you, everybody.
We ran over. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Really sorry. But I just thank you so much. And what I'll do, everyone's wondering how they can get a copy of this. I'm going to put this recording onto my Facebook page. I have a YouTube page as well, Patty Smith for PA. It's going to go on there. On the Facebook page, I'm going to put all the links to Christian's organization, so that if you want to reach out to him, you can do that. If you want to donate, you can do that. Yeah, if anybody has questions, I really personally, this is a subject that means a lot to me, that I really want to do my part in trying to combat. So I'm hoping to have more of these types of town halls from all different perspectives, so that we can really join together and put a stop to this. So that's my goal. So
thanks, everybody.
yeah. Thank you so much.